The mysterious signal. It was a quiet day on Earth. The sky was clear, and the sun shone brightly. People went about their daily lives, not knowing that something extraordinary was happening far above them. In the heart of space, deep within the Milky Way galaxy, a strange signal was traveling toward Earth at incredible speed. The signal appeared out of nowhere. It was unlike anything humanity had ever detected. For weeks, scientists around the world had been puzzled by the sudden appearance of this mysterious transmission. At first, they thought it might be a glitch, some kind of interference from a satellite. But as the days passed, the signal only grew stronger, clearer, and more distinct. On the 10th day, Dr. Elena Roberts, the head of the Earth Space Communications Center, sat in front of a monitor, staring at the series of strange patterns flashing across the screen. She had been working day and night with her team, trying to make sense of the signal. They had already ruled out natural sources like solar winds or asteroids, and there was no known technology in the universe that could send such a message. Is it a language? Elena muttered to herself, leaning closer to the screen. The repeating sequence of sounds and symbols seemed almost too perfect, too deliberate to be random. It wasn't like anything Earth had ever known, but the rhythm of the message felt strangely familiar. The patterns continued for several more hours. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the signal stopped. Silence filled the room, and for a brief moment, the team thought they had lost it. But then, a final message appeared on the screen, a single sentence written in clear, simple English. "Help us, Earthlings. We are not alone, but we are lost." The room fell silent. Dr. Roberts' heart raced. She could hardly believe what she had just read. The signal had been sent by someone, something asking for help, and it was clear. The message wasn't from any Earthling. "We have to investigate this," Dr. Roberts said, her voice trembling with both excitement and fear. The world's leaders were notified within minutes. The United Nations was called into emergency session. Everyone knew that this could be the most important discovery in human history, or it could be a trap, a cruel joke played by some unknown force. But no matter the risk, the human race had always been driven by curiosity. This was the moment that would define the future. After a tense meeting, the decision was made. A small crew of experts would be sent to investigate the source of the signal. The crew would be led by Commander Jack Harris, a decorated military officer with years of experience in deep space exploration. Jack had been part of several successful missions, but this one was different. It wasn't just about reaching new stars or charting new planets. It was about answering a call for help, a call that seemed to echo through the very fabric of space itself. The ship, named the Horizon, was a state-of-the-art spacecraft, designed for long journeys through deep space. It had the latest technology, including an advanced communication system that could send and receive messages over vast distances. However, there was no guarantee that the Horizon would be able to find the source of the signal. It could be light years away, or it could have been sent centuries ago. The crew, a diverse group of scientists, engineers, and military personnel, gathered in the command center of the Horizon. Commander Harris stood at the front, his hands folded behind his back, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. "We don't know what we'll find out there," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "But we have to be ready for anything. The message is clear. We are not alone, and someone, or something, needs our help." As the ship launched into the unknown, there was a sense of excitement in the air. The crew had trained for years for this moment, but no one could have predicted what was waiting for them beyond the stars. Days turned into weeks as the Horizon traveled deeper into space, heading toward the coordinates provided by the mysterious signal. The crew spent most of their time in the ship's small quarters, passing the time with routine tasks. But even in the isolation of space, the uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed heavily on them. "I still can't believe it," Lieutenant Sarah Stone said one evening, looking up from her work. "There are other humans out there, and they need our help." Dr. Marco Vasquez, The ship's lead scientist nodded. It's hard to accept. We've been looking for extraterrestrial life for centuries, but we never thought we might find something, well, human. Jack Harris, who had been quiet for most of the journey, finally spoke up. Whatever they are, they're asking for our help, and I believe we have a duty to answer. The days grew longer as they approached their destination. Each passing moment seemed to increase the tension among the crew. They had no idea what to expect when they finally reached the source of the signal. Would it be a planet full of people, desperate for help? Or would it be a trap set by some unknown enemy, waiting to strike? As the ship entered the outer edges of the signal's origin, the crew gathered in the command center, their eyes fixed on the massive screen in front of them. The unknown world loomed ahead. A strange, uncharted planet bathed in a soft, green glow. "We're almost there," Commander Harris said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "Prepare for landing. Whatever happens next, we face it together." The signal had led them here. Now, the real journey was about to begin. The first encounter. The planet was unlike any other the crew of the Horizon had ever seen. It was shrouded in a thick mist that glowed faintly under the planet's weak sun, creating an eerie greenish hue across the landscape. From orbit, the planet seemed quiet, almost abandoned, but there was a strange pull, a feeling that something, or someone, was waiting for them. As the Horizon descended through the thick atmosphere, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and unease. The mist swirled around the ship, obscuring their view of the ground below. But their instruments told them one thing: there was life on this planet. "Commander Harris, we're coming up on the landing zone," Lieutenant Sarah Stone said, her fingers flying over the control panel. "The signal is definitely coming from this region. No sign of any other ships nearby." "We've got one shot at this," Commander Harris replied, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. "Stay alert, everyone. We don't know what we're walking into." The ship's landing gear extended with a low hum as it touched down on the surface. The mist parted as they settled, revealing a rocky, desolate landscape. The air was thick and cold, and the ground seemed to pulse underfoot, almost as if the planet itself was alive. The crew gathered their gear and prepared to step out, weapons at the ready just in case. With a hiss of the airlock, the crew stepped onto the unknown world. The mist wrapped around them like a cloak, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. They moved cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of life. "Do you hear that?" Dr. Marco Vasquez asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the mist. The sound was faint at first, but soon it became clear, a soft, rhythmic drumming, like distant footsteps, echoing through the fog. "I hear it," Sarah said, her hand tightening on her rifle. "It's coming from that direction." She pointed toward a ridge in the distance. Without another word, they began walking toward the source of the sound, the mist swirling around their feet, making every step feel heavy and uncertain. As they reached the ridge, the noise grew louder, and soon they saw the first sign of life. A group of humanoid figures emerged from the mist. They were tall, their features strikingly similar to humans, but with an almost ethereal quality. Their skin had a pale, luminescent glow, and their eyes, instead of being dark like humans, shone with an otherworldly light. They were dressed in simple, flowing garments, which shimmered in the faint light of the planet's sun. The leader of the group stepped forward, her eyes locking with Commander Harris's as she spoke in a language that the crew did not understand. But her tone was calm, almost pleading, and the urgency in her voice was undeniable. One of the crew members, Dr. Elena Roberts, stepped forward cautiously, holding up a translator device. It buzzed to life, translating the alien speech into English. "We seek your help," the leader said, her voice smooth and melodic, though there was an underlying tension in her words. "Our home has fallen, and we are the last of our kind. Please, you must understand. We have nowhere else to go." The crew stood frozen. The message was clear. The otherworldly humans were in desperate need of help. but there was something strange about their appearance. The glow in their eyes was not just a physical trait. It seemed to pulse with energy, like something far more ancient and powerful than anything the crew had ever encountered. "We're here to help," Commander Harris replied, his voice firm but cautious. "We received your signal, but we need to understand more. Who are you? What happened to your people?" The leader's eyes flickered with a brief flash of sorrow. "We were once part of Earth. Long ago, our ancestors left your world, seeking refuge in the stars. We have evolved since then, and in time, we became something different. But the darkness we fled from has followed us, and now we are all that remains." Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. These beings were, in some way, human, but their evolution had taken a path that was foreign to everything Earth knew. "Why have you come back now?" Dr. Roberts asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Why contact Earth after all this time?" The leader took a slow breath before answering. "Because we cannot fight this alone. We need your help. You, the humans of Earth, your strength, your resilience, may be our only chance to survive." A sudden shiver ran down the spine of every crew member. There was an undeniable truth in her words. They had come here for more than just a simple rescue mission. The situation was far more complicated than they could have imagined. "Then let's talk," Commander Harris said, signaling for the crew to lower their weapons. "We'll help you, but we need to know everything. Who's hunting you? What kind of danger are we facing?" The leader's eyes seemed to glow even brighter as she spoke, her voice full of both fear and resolve. "We are being hunted by something ancient, something that will stop at nothing to destroy us, and anyone who stands in our way." Just then, a strange hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. It was faint at first, but soon the sound grew louder, and the mist around them seemed to thicken, swirling in unnatural patterns. The leader turned sharply, her eyes wide with panic. "They're coming," she whispered. "We don't have much time." Before the crew could react, a shadow loomed in the distance, something massive, moving swiftly through the mist. It was not alone. The unmistakable sound of many heavy footsteps echoed, and the crew braced themselves for what was coming. The first encounter had begun, and it was only the beginning. Understanding the otherworldly humans, the mist around them thickened, swirling like a living thing, pressing against the crew as they made their way toward the alien settlement. The tall humanoids led the humans through the dense fog, their glowing eyes cutting through the haze, guiding the way. Despite the calmness in their movements, there was an undeniable tension in the air. It was as if every step forward brought them closer to something they couldn't yet understand. The settlement, when they reached it, was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. Built into the side of a jagged cliff, the alien homes were made of dark, smooth stone that seemed to shimmer faintly in the mist. There were no windows, only narrow, arching doorways leading into the rock, and the walls were lined with symbols that glowed softly in the dim light. It was a place that felt ancient, as if it had been here long before the humans had ever set foot on Earth. "Welcome to our refuge," the leader of the group said, her voice calm but tinged with sadness. "This is where we have lived for centuries, hiding from what pursues us." The crew stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and something unfamiliar, something almost sweet but bitter at the same time. The interior was sparsely decorated, yet the walls were covered in more glowing symbols and intricate carvings. There was an unsettling beauty in the place, but it felt like it was constantly on the edge of something unfinished. Dr. Marco Vasquez, the ship's lead scientist, ran his fingers across one of the symbols. "These markings, this language, it's not from any known culture," he murmured, studying the patterns. "But they resemble something ancient, something older than any human civilization we've studied." The alien leader, who introduced herself as eerily, nodded gravely. "These are the remnants of our past, of the humans who fled Earth before us. They left behind more than just technology. They left us a legacy a knowledge that has been passed down through generations, though it has become fragmented and lost over time. Fled Earth, Dr. Roberts echoed, her brow furrowing. You were once from Earth, but why did you leave? What happened? Elira's gaze turned distant as she motioned for them to follow her deeper into the settlement. It was long before your time. Earth was in turmoil, and our ancestors sought to escape the war that ravaged your planet. We left, and for a while, we thrived. But what we didn't realize was that Earth's war had consequences far beyond your world. We didn't know we would be followed. Commander Harris stepped forward, sensing the weight of Elira's words. Followed by who? By what? Elira hesitated before answering, her voice quiet. By the darkness, a force that consumed our ancestors and spread across the stars. It hunts us now, always chasing us. It cannot be reasoned with, and it cannot be defeated by ordinary means. It has taken everything from us. There was silence as the crew absorbed her words. The darkness sounded like a mythical enemy, something out of a nightmare. But the urgency in Elira's voice made it clear that it was very real and very much alive. So, your people are the last survivors? Dr. Roberts asked, her voice soft with sympathy. Is that why you contacted Earth? You need help to stop this darkness. Elira nodded. Yes, but there is more. We were not the only ones to leave Earth. There were others, too. Other human colonies scattered across the stars. Some were lost. Some were found. And others, like us, have evolved differently. Elira motioned to the others in her group, the otherworldly humans who had followed them into the settlement. They were similar to her, tall, ethereal-looking, but there was something different about each of them. Their eyes glowed with varying colors, and some had subtle markings on their skin, indicating their different roles within the group. We are not all the same, Elira continued. Over the centuries, we adapted to different environments to survive. Some of us are able to communicate with the very elements of the planets we inhabit, while others have developed abilities beyond what you might imagine. We have evolved into beings of great potential, but we still carry the scars of our past. The crew looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of awe and concern. There was something about these otherworldly humans that felt both familiar and foreign. They were like Earth's ancestors, but at the same time, they were something entirely new, something humanity had never seen before. I still don't understand, Dr. Marco Vasquez said, shaking his head. How did this darkness come to be? And why is it hunting you now, after all this time? Elira's expression darkened. The darkness is not a single entity. It is a force of destruction, one that devours entire civilizations. It spreads like a virus, infecting everything it touches. When our ancestors left Earth, they carried something with them, a seed, a fragment of this darkness. They didn't know it, but it had been lurking in the shadows, growing stronger. She paused, her eyes growing distant again. For generations, we fought to keep it contained, but we failed. The darkness found its way to us, and it is relentless. It has already destroyed our homeworld, and now it is coming for the last of us. The crew stood in stunned silence. They had thought they were answering a simple distress call, a call for help. But this was no ordinary rescue mission. They were stepping into a battle that had been raging for centuries, one that was far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Commander Harris broke the silence. We'll help you, but we need to understand everything. Your technology, your history, your enemies. We can't fight this blind. Elira met his gaze, her eyes glowing brighter than before. We will show you everything. But be warned, once you join us, there is no turning back. The darkness will come for you too, and there is no escaping it. The crew exchanged looks, the gravity of the situation settling in. They had come to help, but now it was clear they were about to become part of something much bigger than they ever expected. And they had no choice but to face whatever lay ahead. A dark revelation. The night was thick with an unnatural stillness as the crew sat in a large chamber, listening intently to Elira. The walls around them glowed faintly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the settlement's energy systems, a constant reminder that the world around them was alive, yet dying. Elira had led them to a central room where she and the other survivors had gathered. Here, the gravity of their mission felt even heavier. The crew could see the fatigue in Elira's eyes, the weight of centuries of survival etched into her face. But there was also a flicker of hope, a hope that Earth's humans might be the key to saving her people. The darkness is not just a force of nature, Elira began, her voice low, almost a whisper. It is a creation, an ancient thing that was born from the fall of our ancestors. It feeds on fear, on destruction. It thrives when life is torn apart, when hope is lost. The room was silent as the crew processed her words. Dr. Vasquez, always the skeptic, furrowed his brow. A creation. You're saying this darkness was made by your ancestors? Elira nodded. Long ago, before we left Earth, our ancestors discovered a power, an energy unlike anything seen before. They thought they could harness it to protect themselves and gain control over the universe. But they were wrong. They didn't understand the force they were meddling with. What they unleashed became the darkness. It grew, spreading across the galaxy, consuming everything in its path. And now it is coming for us again. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The idea of an energy, an entity, created by human hands that could destroy entire worlds was almost too much to comprehend. Commander Harris stood up, his face grim. And you believe that this darkness is still hunting you, all these years later? Elira's eyes glowed faintly, her expression filled with sorrow and fear. Yes, we have been running for centuries, moving from one world to the next, trying to outrun it. But it always catches up with us. It has no mercy. It sees no difference between those it hunts. Earth's descendants are no different in its eyes. And now it knows we are here. The crew was silent, but the weight of Elira's words hung heavily in the air. They had thought they were answering a simple distress signal, but now it seemed they had stumbled into a war that had lasted far longer than humanity's short history. A war between ancient, powerful forces, with Earth's descendants caught in the middle. Just then, there was a sharp, eerie sound, a distant, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls of the settlement. It grew louder with every passing second, a deep, unsettling frequency that felt like it was coming from deep within the planet itself. The darkness, Elira whispered, her face paling. It has found us again. The crew immediately stood, weapons raised, as the walls began to tremble. The mist outside swirled violently, as if caught in a storm. And then, through the dense fog, the unmistakable shapes of colossal figures appeared. Massive, shadowy creatures, their forms twisted and ever-shifting, emerged from the mist. The air seemed to pulse with their presence, as though the planet itself recoiled in fear. "Get to the ship," Commander Harris shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. But as the crew turned to rush out, Elira's voice stopped them. "No," she said firmly, her eyes blazing with an intensity they hadn't seen before. "You can't run from this. You must face it. We must fight. If we don't, everything will be lost." The alien survivors had gathered around her, their glowing eyes now focused, as if they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. They were not afraid. They had long since accepted that their battle was one of survival, and now, for the first time in centuries, they had help. "We will fight," Elira continued, her voice rising. "We have something the darkness fears, something it cannot understand. The legacy of our ancestors, the power they left behind, hidden in the deepest parts of this planet. And we can use it, but we must unlock it before the darkness reaches us." "How do we unlock it?" Dr. Roberts asked, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her weapon. Elira's gaze turned dark, filled with a mixture of determination and regret. It requires a sacrifice. A bloodline must awaken it. And we will need you, Commander Harris, to lead the way. Harris looked at her, confused. My bloodline? I don't understand. The darkness recognizes the blood of those who created it. Elira said, her voice strained. Your ancestors share a connection to this energy, this power. It is your legacy. And we need you to awaken it in order to fight back. The reality of the situation began to sink in for the crew. This was no longer a simple rescue mission. They were fighting something far more ancient and powerful than they had ever imagined, something that had ties to Earth's own history. The very blood in Commander Harris' veins was the key to saving, or destroying, everything. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the settlement. The creatures had arrived, their grotesque forms looming over the horizon, and their eyes locked onto the settlement. The ground shook with each step they took, and the crew realized they were running out of time. We have no choice, Commander Harris said, his voice firm. Let's unlock this power and fight back. But as he said the words, a chilling thought crossed his mind. Was he ready to confront the darkness? Was he truly prepared to awaken a force that might not just save them, but change everything forever? The mist swirled again, and with it, the whispers of something ancient and terrible seemed to echo in the air. The battle was coming, and no one knew who would survive it. The awakening of the power. The moment the creatures appeared on the horizon, it was clear that time was no longer on their side. The ground trembled beneath the feet of the human crew and Elira's people, and the air grew heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. The colossal shadows of the darkness were now visible, formless but deadly. The settlement, once a place of refuge, now felt more like a tomb, and everyone knew they had to act fast. Move, Commander Harris barked, his voice sharp with urgency. Get to the central chamber. We need to activate the power. Now. Elira led them with a quiet determination, her long strides cutting through the fog. She had no fear in her eyes, only resolve. The others, her people, followed close behind, and even though they were facing the nightmare that had haunted them for centuries, there was a sense of unity, a sense of hope. The team moved quickly through the narrow, winding corridors of the settlement. Their footsteps echoed off the walls, and every breath felt like it could be their last. The walls, once smooth and silent, now seemed to pulse with an ancient rhythm, as though the planet itself was alive, reacting to the approaching threat. They reached the central chamber, a vast, circular room carved directly into the heart of the mountain. The air was thick with energy. It hummed around them, low and steady, but there was an underlying tension that felt like a string stretched too tightly, waiting to snap. The room was dimly lit, with large pillars rising from the floor to the ceiling, each one covered in the same strange symbols that had appeared throughout the settlement. At the center of the room stood an altar-like structure, raised and covered in more of those glowing markings. The structure looked ancient, worn by time, but undeniably powerful. Elira stepped forward, her eyes locking onto the altar. "This is where it all began," she said, her voice a mixture of reverence and sorrow. "This is the place where our ancestors hid the power, the force that can stop the darkness. But it is also the place where they sealed it away." Commander Harris stepped forward, his heart racing. "And we need to unlock it." "How?" Elira's eyes glowed brighter. "You are the key. Your bloodline is tied to this power. Only someone with the ancient blood can awaken it. It is within you, Commander Harris. But you must make a choice." The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening as if the darkness itself were drawing closer, pressing in on them from all sides. Harris looked around at the crew, their faces tense but determined. They had followed him here, trusted him, and now they were all relying on him to make the right decision. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice firm despite the dread creeping into his chest. Elira raised her hand, her fingers brushing the air as if unlocking something invisible. A low, resonant hum filled the room, and the altar seemed to come alive, the symbols on it glowing brighter. You must let the power within you connect to the force hidden in this place. It will be painful, and it will require sacrifice. But only then will the darkness be vulnerable. Harris hesitated, his mind racing. Sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? Elira's face softened. The power demands a price. A piece of you must be given to it in order to wield it against the darkness. The bloodline must be awakened, and in doing so, part of you will be bound to this force forever. The crew stood silent, the weight of her words settling over them. This wasn't just about fighting an enemy. This was about Commander Harris giving up something fundamental of himself. Could he do it? Could he risk losing a part of himself to save them all? Before he could respond, the ground rumbled again, and the howling wind outside grew louder. The creatures were getting closer. Time was running out. "I don't have a choice," Harris said, his voice more to himself than anyone else. He turned to Elira, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Let's do it. I'll do whatever it takes." Elira nodded, her expression unreadable. She stepped aside, allowing Harris to approach the altar. As he did, the symbols on the structure seemed to react, swirling and shifting, as if they recognized him, knew he was the one they had been waiting for. He placed his hand on the altar, feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath his palm. The moment he made contact, a sharp, searing pain shot through him. It was as if every nerve in his body was being torn apart, every muscle spasming with excruciating intensity. The pain was overwhelming, but he didn't pull away. He couldn't. A voice, ancient and deep, whispered in his mind, "You seek to awaken the power, but what will you give in return? Your blood, your soul, your very essence. What is your price?" The darkness swelled around him, the pain growing sharper with every word. Harris's vision blurred, and he felt himself falling into the abyss, into something far greater and more terrifying than he had ever imagined. But then, just as the darkness seemed to consume him completely, a surge of light exploded within him, a bright, white-hot fire that shattered the shadows. His hand clenched tighter on the altar, and the power began to flow into him, flooding his veins with a strange, unfamiliar energy. He felt it surging through his body, coursing through his bloodstream, altering him in ways he couldn't understand. The symbols on the altar pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, the room vibrating with energy. The darkness that had loomed over them seemed to retreat, if only for a moment, as the power of the ancient force began to awaken. Then, as the light began to fade, the room grew silent. Harris fell to his knees, gasping for breath, his body trembling. He felt different. The power had entered him, and with it, a deep, unsettling knowledge of what was to come. Elira stepped forward, her eyes wide with awe. "It is done. The power has been awakened." But before they could celebrate, a terrible sound echoed through the settlement, a roar that sent chills down their spines. The creatures were almost upon them, and now, with the power awakened, the true test was about to begin. The final stand. The air inside the central chamber was thick with the heavy scent of ozone, the remnants of the powerful energy that had surged through Commander Harris's body still lingering in the room. His breath came in shallow gasps, and the others stood silent, watching him closely. The transformation had taken its toll on him, but there was no time to rest. Outside, the ground trembled again as the creatures drew nearer. Their low, guttural roars echoed through the settlement, vibrating the walls with their unnatural force. The darkness was almost upon them, and they could feel its cold presence seeping into the very bones of the planet. Harris wiped his forehead, his fingers trembling as he steadied himself. The power still buzzed beneath his skin, an energy that was both alien and familiar, pulling at his very core. The strange voice that had whispered in his mind was still there, but now it was silent, waiting, watching. "We need to move," Commander Harris said, his voice hoarse but determined. "The power we awakened, It's not just for defense. It's what will allow us to strike back. But we have to be ready to face it all. Elira stood beside him, her face set in a mask of determination. She could sense it too, the calm before the storm. The final battle is upon us. The darkness has been tracking us for centuries. It won't stop until every trace of us is wiped out. But now we have the power to fight back. Harris nodded, his hand tightening around the strange energy pulse gun they had found in the chamber. The weapon was designed for this very moment, to channel the ancient energy that now pulsed through his veins. It was their only hope against the monstrous creatures closing in on them. "Are you sure this will work?" Dr. Vasquez asked, his voice tinged with doubt, but his gaze never leaving the door that led to the outside. "The creatures. What are they exactly? They're like nothing we've ever seen." "They are the children of the darkness," Elira explained, her voice steady. "Twisted forms of life that have been shaped by the energy the darkness feeds on. They are its avatars, its soldiers, and they are unstoppable unless we strike at the heart of it." The crew exchanged glances. They had been trained for combat in space, for intergalactic threats, but nothing could have prepared them for this, a force so ancient, so powerful, that it had consumed entire civilizations. And now it was their turn to fight back. Harris felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The others had followed him here, trusted him with their lives. But now, as the roar of the approaching monsters grew louder, he realized that this battle would not just determine their fate. It would determine the fate of countless worlds. And it wasn't just the darkness they were fighting. It was the legacy of their ancestors. The ground shook violently, and the door to the chamber crashed open. The monstrous shapes of the creatures appeared in the doorway, their eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. They were massive, hunched figures, their limbs long and spindly, their skin rippling with dark energy. They moved with terrifying speed, their mouths gaping open, revealing rows of jagged teeth that dripped with a black, oily substance. "Get ready," Harris shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. He gripped the energy pulse gun, feeling the power coursing through him as he aimed it at the nearest creature. A beam of brilliant light shot from the weapon, striking the creature square in the chest. It screeched in agony, its body convulsing, but it didn't fall. "Damn it," Harris muttered under his breath. The weapon was working, but it wasn't enough. The creature was still alive. Elira stepped forward, her hands raised. Her voice rose in a chant, ancient words that seemed to vibrate with the very power of the planet itself. The air crackled around her as she summoned the energy of her people, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The creatures recoiled for a moment, disoriented by the surge of energy, but it wasn't enough to stop them. "Commander," Elira called, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Use the power within you. Channel it into the weapon. It is your blood that can break through the darkness." Harris's heart raced as he realized the truth. The weapon alone wasn't enough. It needed more. The energy he had awakened within himself was the key. He took a deep breath, feeling the power inside him flare to life again, sharp and raw. The creature nearest to him lunged, but Harris stepped aside, his hand tight around the pulse gun. He focused all of his will into the weapon, pushing the energy within him into the weapon's core. The gun hummed louder, the light around it intensifying as it absorbed the power from his very soul. The beam that shot out this time was different. It wasn't just light. It was pure energy, a force so intense that it ripped through the creature in an instant, disintegrating it into ash. For a brief moment, everything stood still. The ground trembled, but the creatures halted, stunned by the sudden explosion of energy. Harris stood, breathing heavily, his body aching from the strain. But there was no time to rest. The remaining creatures surged forward, their massive forms charging with terrifying speed. The crew opened fire, their weapons flashing brightly, but it was the combined power of Harris and Elira that seemed to push the darkness back. Every strike from Harris's energy pulse gun tore through the creatures, each blast weakening them, making the path clearer. But just as they thought they might have the upper hand, the ground erupted. A massive, towering figure emerged from the shadows. The true leader of the darkness. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a being of pure dark energy, its form constantly shifting and twisting, an entity of pure malice. "Stay back," Elira shouted, her eyes wide with terror. "That is the source, the heart of the darkness." Harris felt the power surge within him, but this time it was different. This creature wasn't just a monster. It was the embodiment of everything the darkness stood for. They had no choice but to confront it, to destroy it once and for all. The battle was not over. It had only just begun. The last light. The heart of the darkness towered above them, its form a swirling mass of shadow and raw, malevolent energy. It was no longer a creature, no longer something that could be seen with the eyes alone. It was an embodiment of fear, of destruction, and of everything that had ever threatened the universe. The air around it pulsed with an oppressive force, like a weight pressing down on their very souls. The ground beneath their feet cracked and splintered, as if the planet itself was fighting against the terrible presence that had been awakened. The remaining creatures, the twisted soldiers of the darkness, began to gather, forming a barricade around their leader. The roars and shrieks filled the air, drowning out all other sound, as if the very universe was screaming in terror. Commander Harris could feel the power surge inside him, but it was different now. It wasn't just the raw energy of the weapon or the ancient force of the planet. It was something deeper, something that resonated with the very essence of humanity. He could hear the voices of those who had fought before him, their whispers of hope and defiance echoing in his mind. "Now," Elira shouted, "together we can bring it down." But as the crew rallied together, Harris realized that they couldn't fight it the same way they had fought the smaller creatures. This was something more. This was the source. This was the force that had turned their world upside down, that had driven their ancestors into hiding, and that had fed on countless civilizations. The creature's form twisted, its shape ever-changing as it moved toward them, tendrils of darkness reaching out like a monstrous hand. It was drawing them in, trying to swallow them whole. Harris knew that if they didn't do something now, if they didn't strike the final blow, they would all be consumed by the endless void. Harris stepped forward, his hand tight around the energy pulse gun. The weapon had become an extension of himself now, its power fully attuned to the strange ancient force that flowed through him. But even with all the power he could muster, the creature before him was overwhelming. Its presence was suffocating, and the air felt thick, like they were drowning in it. "Commander," Dr. Vasquez called, his voice strained as he fired his own weapon at the advancing darkness. "This isn't enough. It's too powerful." Harris nodded grimly. He could feel the truth in Dr. Vasquez's words. The power they had awakened, the strength they had found within themselves, was nothing compared to the true force of the darkness. But then, an idea sparked in Harris's mind, something he hadn't thought of before, something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't about destroying the heart of the darkness. It was about sealing it away. Harris turned to Elira, his mind racing. "Elira, what if we could trap it? We don't need to destroy it, just imprison it." Elira's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. "You're talking about using the ancient power to bind it, to trap it inside this world." Harris nodded. "Yes, if we can channel all of our energy into the core, into the very heart of the planet, we might be able to imprison it there. It won't be able to escape, but neither will we be able to. We'll be bound to it, just like our ancestors were." Elira hesitated. She had always known the dangers of the ancient power, had seen the toll it had taken on her people. But this was the only way. The only way to stop the darkness from spreading across the universe. "I will help you," she said softly. "Together, we can seal it away." The crew stood in silence, the weight of their decision heavy in the air. There would be no going back. The moment they began, They would be trapped here, bound to this world for eternity. But there was no other choice. If they didn't act, the darkness would spread, consuming everything in its path. "We'll do it," Harris said, his voice steady. Elira stepped beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Then we are ready." The crew gathered around them, each one of them locking eyes, sharing a final moment of resolve. They were no longer just a group of humans and aliens. They were a single force, united against a power that threatened to destroy everything. Harris raised the energy pulse gun, the power surging within him once again. The heart of the darkness was now within range. Its tendrils were reaching out, trying to pull them in, but Harris pushed forward, focusing all of his energy into the weapon. Elira joined him, her hands raised in a final incantation. Together, they channeled everything: the power of the planet, the ancient force, the combined will of every human and alien in the room, into the core of the weapon. The light that erupted from it was blinding, pure, and all-encompassing. It swirled around them, wrapping them in a protective cocoon of energy as they began the final incantation. The heart of the darkness howled in fury, its form warping and thrashing against the energy. It screamed, but it could not escape. Slowly, it was drawn into the swirling vortex, sucked into the very core of the planet. The creatures around them screamed in agony as their leader was pulled into the abyss, their bodies disintegrating in the process. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the light vanished. The chamber was silent once more, the air heavy with the residue of the battle. Harris collapsed to his knees, exhausted, his body drained of all energy. Elira stood beside him, her expression unreadable, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "We did it," she whispered. The world was quiet, the heavy darkness now gone. The creatures were no more, and the planet was safe, for now. But the price of victory was high. They had sealed the darkness away, yes, but they were now bound to this place. The energy they had used, the power they had summoned, would keep them here, in this world, for the rest of their lives. There was no going back. The crew gathered around, knowing that they would be the last to live in this world. They had sacrificed everything to stop the darkness, to save countless lives across the galaxy. And they had done it together. As the final embers of light flickered and died, the last words of the ancient prophecy echoed in Harris's mind. "The light will fade, but the hope remains."